Good morning and welcome to YKJ Japan. So as you can see, I'm here at the mud pond today checking on the tosai. The weather now is getting more predictable, so in the next few days there'll be less necessity to come and check on the fish so often. So I think by the end of next week I will probably be coming then after that 3 times each week, which is what I did all the way through last year. I think that's enough to keep a really close eye on what's going on. Fish are doing really well. Body weight that the fish are carrying is really nice, and to be fair, the fish seem to be growing already as well. Water temperature right now is around about 24.5 degrees thereabouts. The height of summer, or the height of the hot weather, this pond will see probably around about 26.5 maybe at most. Although mud ponds typically in Japan quite often ride up higher than that. In this case, this pond, it's kind of puts the pond at an advantage. This water depth is what really stops the temperature from going too high. If the temperature goes too high, what then happens is that the metabolism of the fish to actually grow big becomes very strong, but the oxygen levels become lower, the appetite becomes lower, and so consequently you end up with fish that are growing longer, faster, but basically with a loss of body weight because of the loss of appetite. Consequently also the colour doesn't really fare so well in those higher temperatures. So anyway, so far so good, things are going well. Feeding's already on a pretty decent amount, and I will increase that in probably about 5 or 6 days time. Increase it a little bit, and then that will probably be okay for the next couple of weeks until the fish are getting bigger again, in which case I will adjust accordingly. So far so good. Summer is just around the corner, although I think a lot of you back in the UK will think that summer's already here. There we go. Now moving on to yesterday. Yesterday I talked about the word mottainai, basically waste of money. And so going back to yesterday's, I would say discussion, it was a one-sided discussion, but anyway, going back to yesterday's talk about that. Water in Japan is very, very soft, and the means to try to manipulate water and do anything better with it is something that is kind of regarded as mottainai. What you need to bear in mind, if you've seen yesterday's one, what you need to bear in mind when you actually look at what breeders are doing with mud ponds or raising fish in Japan in general, is that the vast majority, and I would say almost everything that a breeder produces, will be sold as tosai, and the vast majority of the remaining fish that aren't sold as tosai will actually be sold as nisai. So the majority of those fish from tosai and nisai will actually be shipped overseas to koi dealers, and therefore going on into hobbyist ponds after that. So the number of fish that actually stay in Japan at breeders' places for growing on is very, very minimal. And to be frank, in let's say a 1 year or 2 year time frame, anything that has any consequential impact on how fish are raised in that time frame is going to be quite minuscule. So to try to get a better result with tosai or a better result with nisai comes with considerable expense and considerable effort, and that is where the word mottainai I think is best applied, because frankly it is mottainai. If I was a koi breeder and I was trying to do everything that I'm trying to do with tosai or nisai that were going to be sold and shipped as tosai or nisai, it would be so much effort and so much expense that it would just, I think in many cases, would actually finish breeders off trying to do that. But for me, it's a very different scenario. I'm buying fish, I'm trying to raise fish, so I'm already choosing fish to keep and raise, and keeping those fish with the next, not season in mind or the following season in mind, but long term. Even with this tosai challenge, what I'm actually kind of looking for with this is just a handful of fish that are really, really screaming out to be left in Japan beyond that. Now at the moment, or last year, there was very little capacity to actually be able to keep any of the fish from last year's event further through to Sanzai. We do actually have two fish at Yumeko Japan in our indoor fish house from last year's event, which we raised into Sanzai, and those fish are very good. But if we had more space, there would have been probably another 4 or 5 fish that I would have liked to have been able to offer to keep for people through until Sanzai. In the future though, I think it's something that we will be able to do. So going back to Mottainai again, you need to kind of think about just what breeders are doing and how cost effective that effort is before using your own raising techniques, which are based on what breeders are doing. So breeders, as I mentioned yesterday, they've not experienced hard water. They've not experienced the kind of water that lies in the UK, which is where I'm from. So they don't really know any different. It's a case of this is the material we've got, this is a material we've used, and we've always used it, it's always worked, why change it? And that is basically the mindset. So if you look at anything, let's say from days of old, and apply those kind of raising techniques to your own pond, all you're really kind of doing is keeping yourself in the dark ages. So just think about that a little bit. Now on that subject, waste of money, that also comes on to feeding. Now in concrete ponds, feeding is actually very, very important, but concrete ponds in their own right is very good at finishing fish up. When I say concrete ponds, I mean hobbyist ponds that are essentially fiberglass or lined with a mechanical and biological filter. So those kind of environments have more finishing impact on the fish. They will make the fish look more attractive, and in most cases they will make the fish's quality, longevity last a shorter time span, as it were. So it will finish the fish up faster, but the fish won't last as long. However, if you manipulate the water and try to replicate this kind of environment, which you'll never do, but try to get somewhere close to this kind of environment, or at least Japanese water, you're kind of getting halfway there. And if you also pay more attention to everything else that you're doing, all of those things that might be quite costly and might take a lot of effort actually do give you a lot of reward. So looking back at the mud pond again, another thing that's Mottainai is we're using very expensive koi food, and we're mixing colour food that is sinking food along with normal staple food, well I say normal, sake hikari, which is sinking food, and also floating pellets as well. So we're mixing these foods together, and it's not a cheap food to feed. Now most breeders, for the main part of their stock that's in the mud pond, they will use a lot cheaper koi food. And basically the mindset really is that for the mud pond, the koi food's not really important, and you can kind of get away with everything. But bear in mind what I said a moment ago, it comes back to that time frame that they're going to keep the fish for. So if the breeder is keeping fish in the mud pond from Tosai until Nisai, in that time frame they don't really need extremely expensive food. Some breeders do use really expensive food in the mud ponds, but a lot of breeders tend not to, because it is really, really expensive. And the fish that are in the mud pond, they can basically get other food that's within the mud pond. They can sift their way through the mud and actually get insects, that kind of thing, out of there as well. So they do get some other benefit of being in the mud pond, which basically makes food less important. For me, I need to waste money, because for me, trying to raise that image is really, really important to me. Trying to get people's confidence in what I'm doing is really important to me. If I can't do that in the next 2 or 3 years, personally I think it would be really, really hard for me to survive in Japan and make a business that's successful in Japan. So my way of thinking is, because I'm kind of trying to choose fish specifically and then raise those fish, it puts me in a position where that whole Mottainai thing, that waste of money, isn't really such a waste of money, because it's not, let's say, an expense that's spread amongst 100 fish. It's a case where I've selected 10 fish from 100 fish and then raising them in a more expensive manner, which I think is certainly not a waste of money. So to me, as I said yesterday, anything that gives me, let's say, a 10% benefit in 1 year, essentially, if that fish is staying here for several years, it's kind of like compound interest. The way that it's added on in its benefit is compounded year after year. And if I'm making more effort in terms of water, ponds, filtration, fish house, shading on the fish house, like light shading if you like, temperature control, and also feeding, all of those factors, yeah, sure, each one might have a very minuscule improvement, but combine them all together, that improvement becomes, or that benefit becomes quite significant. And if you compound that over, let's say, 3 or 4 years, it then starts to make a huge impact on the actual end result. So that is basically why I'm doing what I do, and why in some regards mottainai as a word, or waste of money, is something that crops up not so much in koi, but it's in daily life. It can be anything, leaving lights on, or throwing away stuff that you could recycle, or all of those things. It's something that in England we might say, oh, that's a bit tight, or that kind of thing, tight, scringy, or that kind of thing. Actually, in reality, since I've been here, I've kind of adjusted a lot to that way of thinking, that a lot of these things actually you shouldn't waste. You should try and reuse or recycle or just save money on. But when something like this, which is important to me, costs more money to do, I can't afford to not pay that extra bit to try and get that extra bit more benefit from it in terms of the end result. So mottainai comes down to water, comes down to food, and in future rambles, if you like, it will come down to other things as well, so watch this space. Anyway, thank you for watching.